Lot 249. Of the dealings of Edward Bellingham with William Monkhouse Lee, and of the cause of the great terror of Abercrombie Smith, it may be that no absolute and final judgment will ever be delivered. It is true that we have the full and clear narrative of Smith himself, and such corroboration as he could look for from Thomas Styles, the servant, from the Reverend Plumtree Peterson, Fellow of Olds, and from such other people as chanced to gain some passing glance at this or that incident in a singular chain of events. Yet in the main the story must rest upon Smith alone, and the most will think that it is more likely that one brain, however outwardly sane, has some subtle warp in its texture, some strange flaw in its workings, than that the path of nature has been overstepped in open day in so famed a centre of learning and light as the University of Oxford. Yet when we think how narrow and how devious this path of nature is, how dimly we can trace it for all our lamps of science, and how from the darkness which girds it round great and terrible possibilities loom ever shadowly upwards, it is a bold and confident man who will put a limit to the strange bypaths into which the human spirit may wander. In a certain wing of what we will call Old College in Oxford, there is a corner turret of an exceeding great age. The heavy arch which spans the open door has bent downwards in the centre under the weight of its years, and the grey, lichen-blotched blocks of stone are bound and knitted together with withes and strands of ivy, as though the old mother had set herself to brace them up against wind and weather. From the door, a stone stair curves upwards spirally, passing 2 landings, and terminating in a third one, its steps all shapeless and hollowed by the tread of so many generations of the seekers after knowledge. Life has flowed like water down this winding stair, and, water-like, has left these smooth-worn grooves behind it. From the long-gowned, pedantic scholars of Plantagenet days down to the young bloods of a later age, how full and strong had been that tide of young English life. And what was left now of all those hopes, those strivings, those fiery energies, save here and there in some old-world churchyard a few scratches upon a stone, and perchance a handful of dust in a mouldering coffin? Yet here were the silent stair and the grey old wall, with bend and saltire and many another heraldic device still to be read upon its surface, like grotesque shadows thrown back from the days that had passed. In the month of May, in the year 1884, 3 young men occupied the sets of rooms which opened onto the separate landings of the old stair. Each set consisted simply of a sitting-room and of a bedroom, while the 2 corresponding rooms upon the ground floor were used, the one as a coal-cellar, and the other as the living-room of the servant, or gyp, Thomas Styles, whose duty it was to wait upon the 3 men above him. To right and to left was a line of lecture-rooms and of offices, so that the dwellers in the old turret enjoyed a certain seclusion, which made the chambers popular among the more studious undergraduates. Such were the 3 who occupied them now: Abercrombie Smith above, Edward Bellingham beneath him, and William Monkhouse Lee upon the lowest story. It was 10 o'clock on a bright spring night, and Abercrombie Smith lay back in his armchair, his feet upon the fender, and his briar-root pipe between his lips. In a similar chair, and equally at his ease, there lounged on the other side of the fireplace his old school-friend Jeffro Hasty. Both men were in flannels, for they had spent their evening upon the river, but apart from their dress no one could look at their hard-cut, alert faces without seeing that they were open-air men, men whose minds and tastes turned naturally to all that was manly and robust. Hasty, indeed, was stroke of his college boat, and Smith was an even better oar, but a coming examination had already cast its shadow over him and held him to his work, save for the few hours a week which health demanded. A litter of medical books upon the table, with scattered bones, models, and anatomical plates, pointed to the extent as well as the nature of his studies, while a couple of single sticks and a set of boxing gloves above the mantelpiece hinted at the means by which, with Hasty's help, he might take his exercise in its most compressed and least distant form. They knew each other very well, so well that they could sit now in that soothing silence which is the very highest development of companionship. "Have some whisky," said Abercrombie Smith at last, between two cloudbursts. "Scotch in the jug and Irish in the bottle." "No, thanks. I'm in for the sculls. I don't liquor when I'm training. How about you?" "I'm reading hard. I think it best to leave it alone." Hasty nodded, and they relapsed into a contented silence. "By the way, Smith," asked Hasty presently, "have you made the acquaintance of either of the fellows on your stair yet?" "Just a nod when we passed, nothing more." "I should be inclined to let it stand at that. I know something of them both. Not much, but as much as I want. I don't think I should take them to my bosom if I were you, not that there's much amiss with Monkhouse Lee." "Meaning the thin one?" "Precisely. He's a gentlemanly little fellow. I don't think there's any vice in him. But then you can't know him without knowing Bellingham." "Meaning the fat one?" "Yes, the fat one, and he's a man whom I, for one, would rather not know." Abercrombie Smith raised his eyebrows and glanced across at his companion. "What's up, then?" he asked. "Drink? Cards? Cad? You used not to be censorious." "Ah, you evidently don't know the man, or you wouldn't ask. There's something damnable about him, something reptilian. My gorge always rises at him. I should put him down as a man with secret vices, an evil liver. He's no fool, though. They say that he's one of the best men in his line that they've ever had in the college." "Medicine or classics?" "Eastern languages. He's a demon at them. Chillingworth met him somewhere above the Second Cataract last long, and he told me that he just prattled to the Arabs as if he'd been born and nursed and weaned among them. He talked Coptic to the Copts, and Hebrew to the Jews, and Arabic to the Bedouins, and they were all ready to kiss the hem of his frock-coat. There are some old hermit Johnnies up in those parts who sit on rocks and scowl and spit at the casual stranger. Well, when they saw this chap Bellingham, before he'd said 5 words, they just lay down on their bellies and wriggled. Chillingworth said he'd never seen anything like it. Bellingham seemed to take it as his right, too, and strutted about among them and talked down to them like a Dutch uncle. Pretty good for an undergrad of Olds, wasn't it?" "Why do you say you can't know Lee without knowing Bellingham?" "Because Bellingham is engaged to his sister Evelyn. Such a bright little girl, Smith. I know the whole family well. It's disgusting to see that brute with her. A toad and a dove, that's what they always remind me of."